Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Theodora, a Byzantine princess, sold as a war trophy. What secrets hides her tragic destiny? Discover its history, full of intrigue and survival. Subscribe and activate the bell so as not to miss anything. Imagine the opulence of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. You are a privileged witness of its splendor: white marble palaces, churches with golden domes that shine in the sun, streets full of merchants from the east and west, a melting pot of cultures and unparalleled wealth. The imperial court, a hotbed of political intrigues, but also of artistic refinement and overflowing luxury. Theodora, still a girl, grew in this environment of splendor and power. Think of lavish banquets, in the tables full of exotic delicacies, aromatic wines. The heavenly music that resonated in the imperial hall's life in court was a constant show. A dance between the pomp and the ceremony, where every detail, from clothing to the label, reflected the power and greatness of the empire. Princess Theodora, surrounded by luxury, enjoyed a privileged education, learning the arts, letters, and complexities of courtly life. But behind brightness and glamour, there were shadows: the rivalries between noble families, palatial conspiracies, the constant threat of invasions and rebellions, even within the intimate circle of the imperial court. Life was not exempt from dangers. The security and well-being of a princess, although apparently assured by the opulence that surrounded her, depended on the complexities of imperial policy and the favor of the emperor. But let's go back to Theodora. His birth, in the midst of splendor and the decline of Constantinople, was wrapped in an atmosphere of palatial intrigues. Imagine the constant murmur of secrets, the alliances that were woven and broke, the excessive ambitions of the imperial court. She, a girl with dark eyes and jet-black hair, grew in that complex environment, observing, learning, absorbing the lessons, both explicit and implicit, of a world that surrounded her. His education, although privileged for his time, was not limited to the liberal arts of a princess. Theodora learned to read, write, and dominate the art of rhetoric, but also to observe the subtle power game that was developed around him. He learned to read between the lines, to decipher the looks and gestures, to understand the silent language of the court. That knowledge, as valuable as any old book, prepared it for the future, an uncertain future that was coming. It was not an idyllic childhood, much less. The courtiers, rumors, rivalries among noble families, all of them were part of their daily reality. Despite its status, the constant threat of political instability and violence castrated any sense of security. She learned to survive, to navigate the complexities of power, to develop mental sharpness and adaptability that would mark it forever. Imagine Theodora, still a girl, in the heart of the imperial palace. You see the brightness of purple and gold, but you also feel the weight of dynastic rivalries. The families who aspired to the throne, with their alliances and betrayals, wove a complex network around their crib. Every smile, every look, could hide a threat. The greatness of Byzantium was also his perdition, a scenario where power was disputed with the same ferocity as love. The dynasties, those genealogical power trees, were intertwined and collided. You are a silent witness of the secret negotiations, the marriages arranged to consolidate alliances, the conspiracies that were warned in the shadows. Each member of the imperial family, with their own interests and ambitions, was a key piece in this deadly game. That a simple mistake, a false movement, could cost life or exile. Think about blood ties, as strong as chains, ties that sometimes became shackles. The imperial family, despite their wealth and power, was linked by ties that could be both source of support and destruction. Brothers who competed for the emperor's favor, cousins who disputed the throne, and uncles who secretly plotted the fall of their nephews. Theodora, small and helpless, was a piece on this mortal chessboard. But the tranquility of the court was a mask. You begin to perceive the growing murmur of external threats. The barbarians, those peoples who gathered at the borders of the empire, became increasingly bold. His raids, formerly sporadic, were now more frequent and devastating. The reports arrived in Constantinople, painting a gloomy painting of llamas and populations looted. The emperor, with his face hardened by concern, brought together his directors to discuss strategies. But the feeling of helplessness was palpable. /prosody, /speak. The speak, a prosody rate equals 90%. the Huns, under the fearsome Attila, were a constant threat in the north. Its fierce warriors on horseback, with their arches and their spears, became a nightmare for the Roman legions to the east. The Persians, with their powerful army, maintained incessant pressure on the oriental borders of the empire, threatening to destabilize the fragile balance of power. You see the official letters, the maps crossed out, the latent fear in the eyes of the generals. The pressure on the empire was immense. Resources that were previously destined for the construction and imperial splendor now deviated towards the defense. The army, although powerful, was exceeded by the magnitude of the threats. Taxes rose, people suffered, and discontent grew. You feel the tension that accumulated in the streets of Constantinople, an omen of the terrible events that were to come. Peace was a distant memory, a mirage in a war desert. That murmur became a deafening roar. You saw how the legions, once imposing themselves, crumbled before the brute force of the invaders. The earth was trembling under the weight of horses and the clash of swords. Constantinople, the jewel of the empire, the city that seemed impregnable, was besieged everywhere. You, from the distance, presented the beginning of the fall, a show of horror and despair. The walls, which for centuries had resisted countless sieges, began to give in. The shouts of the soldiers, mixed with the regrets of the population, resonated in the air. The sound of destruction was deafening, a hammer hitting the very soul of the empire. The elegant architecture of the city, a symbol of power and greatness, became ashes and rubble. You observed helpless from distance, the image of imperial greatness fading in chaos and violence. The fall of Constantinople was not just a military defeat. It was the end of an era, the collapse of a world that you thought was unwavering. The tragedy hovered over you, not only as a spectator, but as a threat that was inexorably approaching. The dust settled on the battlefield, a brown mantle that covered the tragedy. You saw how enemy soldiers approached, their faces hardened by war, and despair invaded you. The imperial army, your army, was defeated. The cacophony of screams and groans slowly went out, leaving a sepulchral silence that only broke the regrets of the injured. Then you saw him, the leader of the invaders, imposing on his steed. His eyes, cold and calculators, they looked for you among chaos that a chill toward the spine, while you felt the weight of defeat, the end of your world as you knew it. The capture was inevitable. The princess turned into a prisoner. They dragged you away from horror, among the bodies of the fallen. The stench with blood and death wrapped you. The luxury of your palatial life faded. Silk and gold were replaced by the rough fabric of a sack, the soft bed on the hard floor. The horror of defeat was not only the loss of a battle, but the loss of your freedom, your dignity, of your future. They dragged you, the cold earth under your scraped knees. The sketch stench, fear and spices hit you strongly. A slave market, a hotbed of bodies and despair. Your clothes, once royalty symbol, were now torn and dirty, a testimony of your fall. The eyes of merchants, hard and calculators, examined you as if you were an animal, looking for the best offer for a war trophy. The humiliation was palpable. Every look, every cough, every murmur was an affront to your dignity. They offered you as an object, a war award, your body and your soul put on sale to the highest bidder. The weight of defeat crushed your spirit, while the promise of a life of servitude hovered on you like a sword. The hammer of the auctioneer resonated, hitting the air with a cruelty that froze you to the bones. Each bid was a new wound in your soul, every currency one more humiliation. They watched you, they valued you, they argued you as if you were a horse or a tool, and not the princess you ever went. The dishonor was unbearable, a weight that threatened to crush you completely. Your eyes met his, a huge barbarian, with a scar that crossed his face like lightning. His gaze was cold, calculator. Without a compassion apex, he dragged you to a dark and humid cell. The smell of mold invaded you. The only company were the rats and the echo of your own beats. The new master, Attila, watched you from darkness, a predator who had found his prey. The days became a monotony of hunger, cold, and humiliation. They forced you to perform strenuous jobs. The body hurt you. Each muscle protested. The few words that you exchanged with Attila were rough orders, pronounced with a guttural voice that froze your blood. Fear had become your only partner, a shadow that never abandoned you. /prosody /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. The nights were still worse. The darkness wrapped you, amplifying each noise, every whisper, dreams, if they could be called that, were nightmares where despair mixed with sadness, and always, at the bottom of your mind, the certainty that your life, your dignity, had been stolen. Atalo, your master, was the absolute owner of your destiny, and that destination seemed written in the cold stone of your prison. The cell was cold, wet, and smelled like wet and fear of others. But inside you, something was resisted. You remember your mother's lessons, the Empress, about the inner strength, about the dignity that even adversity cannot snatch. You were a princess, daughter of an empire, and although you were now prisoner, your spirit remained indomitable. The look of that barbarian, although cold, had not broken you. Every night, before sleeping, you closed your eyes and imagined in the palace, surrounded by luxuries and surrounded by your family. You remembered the sound of the waves, the aroma of the imperial gardens, the heat of the sun on your face. Those memories were your shelter, your strength against the darkness that surrounded you. They were the flame that had hope alive in your heart. You knew that survival did not depend only on physical force, but also on mental strength. You refused to let fear consume you. You clung to hope, to the certainty that one day you would see your people again, to your home. That hope, fed by the force of your spirit, was your shield against despair, your secret weapon against the brutality of your captivity. The first blow left you breath. It was not a strong blow, but humiliating. Your clothes ripped you, leaving your body exposed to the cold look of the barbarians. They forced you to work tirelessly, under the scorching sun or relentless rain. Your body, once a royalty symbol, was now a tool for the hardest work, an additional load on the back of a conquered town. Hunger was a constant. Minimum rations of hard bread and dirty water were your daily livelihood. The dream, a luxury that you could barely allow you, interrupted by the constant horrors of pain and the threats of the guards. Your body weakened. The wounds were infected, and hope seemed to fade with each dawn. Violence was part of your daily life. Blows, insults, and looks of contempt accompanied you everywhere. Your dignity, your past, your name, everything had been erased. You were only a number, a property, an object without value beyond your ability to work. The only company was silence, broken only by the creak of your sore bones and the echo of your own sighs. The work was exhausting, an endless chain of humiliating tasks under the relentless sun. One day, while you gathered firewood in the forest, you heard a noise. A horse, a beautiful black steed, approached with an imposing rider. His armor shone, although worn by time, and his gaze, although severe, did not inspire you as much fear as the barbarians. It was different. The rider stopped at a distance, watching you carefully. He didn't talk to you immediately. He only looked at you, as if trying to decipher something in your gaze. The silence lasted, heavy and tense, until finally, in a serious but soft voice, he asked you in a dialect that, although with difficulty, you managed to understand. "Are you Theodora, the princess of Byzantium?" You nodded, feeling a knot in the throat. The surprise paralyzed you, but a spark of hope began to light inside. Who was this man? An unexpected ally in this hell? The rider, after a moment of silence, continued, "I have come to rescue you. Get ready to leave." His words resonated as a promise in the silence of the forest. The black steed, scared but docile, allowed you to approach you. His rider, a man with a deep look in the face tanned by the sun, offered you help. He spoke in a low voice, of a network of ancient slaves who planned their flight to the north, to free lands. It was a risky conspiracy, a game of shadows and whispers, but offered the only possibility of escaping your captivity. They promised refuge, a place where you could cure the wounds, physically and emotionally. But the route to freedom was dangerous. Each step was a bet, every shadow, a threat. You had to trust these strangers, their plans, in their promise of a better future, a future without chains or humiliations. The conspiracy was a maze of secret meetings and encoded messages. Each person you met was a vital link in the chain that would lead you to freedom. Your heart was beating strongly, a whirlwind of hope and fear. Redemption seemed unattainable, but the possibility of a new beginning promoted you to move forward, to trust the promise of a different future. slash prosody is slash speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. He told you about a network of former allies willing to help you escape. He described a dangerous path, through dark forests and treacherous mountains, but a possibility of freedom. The next night, in the moonlight, you slid out of your prison, the heart beating hard on your chest. Fear was a constant partner, but hope, even more powerful, drove you forward. You enter in the dark, guided by the dim light of the stars and the knowledge that man had given you. Each branch of branches, every whisper of the wind, put you on alert. The possibility of being discovered was terrifying, but the idea of a better life of freedom was stronger than any fear. You had to overcome cautelous rivers and steep slopes, with only the force of your will as a guide. Hunger and thirst tormented you, but you went ahead. You slept little, always alert. With an attentive ear to any suspicious sound, you found refuge in caves and under the protection of imposing trees, always with an eye on the horizon, looking for an indication, a sign of hope. Every day was a struggle for survival, one more step towards freedom that you were so longed for. One day, at dawn, you divided a small settlement in the distance that it was a sign, a ray of hope in the midst of darkness. Many dangers were still waiting for you, but for the first time in a long time, you felt that freedom was within your reach. The fight had been arduous, survival, a constant battle, but you were still standing, ready to face what would be presented to you. The escape was exhausting, days and nights touring barely visible paths. The constant fear of being discovered pushed you forward. You slept, with the sound of wolves as your only company. The food was scarce, sometimes only wild or roots that you collected with trembling hands. Each dancer was a new struggle for survival, a career against time and against despair. You arrived at a small remote town, away from the commercial routes and the reach of the empire. Its inhabitants, humble peasants who lived outside of imperial power, offered you refuge in exchange for help in the fields. The work was hard, your hands were filled with calluses, but at least you had a roof on your head and enough food to survive. Anonymity was your best shield, your new identity. Life outside the empire was different from everything you knew. The opulence and luxury of the court were behind, replaced by the simplicity and austerity of rural life. You learned to weave, to cultivate the earth, to value the friendship and solidarity of those who welcomed you. Despite the hardness of existence, you found a certain peace in the stillness of simple life, a freedom that you could only dream of. Finally, after days of uncertainty, you divided a small village on the horizon. The smoke that came out of his chimneys gave you a spark of hope. You approached cautiously. The heart beating you hard on your chest that it was a risk, but the need for refuge was greater than feared. An old man, with a penetrating look and a face furrowed by the time, saw you from the entrance of a humble cabin. When recognizing the unique brightness in your eyes, his lips were curved in a faint smile. That it was your maternal uncle, a man who thought you lost forever in the chaos of war. His words, although few, were a balm for your injured soul. He offered you shelter, food, and most importantly, the promise of a new beginning, far from the horror you had lived. The cabin was small, but warm and cozy. The smell of freshly baked and smoking wood wrapped you in a comforting hug. After so much deprivation, the simple fact of having a roof on your head and a hot meal in your stomach was an immense luxury. While you savored the hot broth, you heard your uncle's story, his struggle to survive and his unsuccessful search for you. In his eyes you saw a mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for the losses suffered, hope for the future that was glimpsed. Your uncle told you about a small coastal town, a place away from wars and conflicts, where you could start a new life, free and anonymous. It was the promise you needed to hear to start healing. Fear still attached you, but the smell of freshly baked bread reassured you a little. The houses, humble but cozy, offered you a break after so much suffering. You watched the people, their faces tanned by the sun, their simple clothes, and you wondered if you could ever fit in this new world, so different from the luxury and splendor that you met in your past. You learned to weave, to cook, to perform tasks that you never imagined. Your hands, formerly adorned with jewelry, now hardened with daily work. It was a hard life, but it also gave you a strange feeling of peace, an escape of the horrors you had witnessed. Anonymity protected you, gradually erasing your old identity. Prosody is speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. They called you Ilara now. A simple name without pretensions, which allowed you to hide in full view. Ilara, the weaver, the cook, the woman who lived in the small village. You were no longer Theodora, the princess, the heiress. You had buried, at least for a while, that past that persecuted you as a shadow. But peace was just a mask. The memory of your humiliation, of betrayal, of the loss, clung to you with iron claws. You slept with the image of those cruel faces recorded in your mind, and every dawn brought the need for justice. It wasn't just revenge for yourself. It was for all the women who had suffered the same, for all those who continued to suffer in silence. You started gathering information, looking for allies. You spoke with merchants, with pilgrims, with any soul that could have heard rumors about your oppressor, about those who had stolen your life. Every track, however small, was a ray of hope in the dark, one more step towards the truth that you were so long to discover. The search was arduous, dangerous. You faced distrust, the constant threat of being discovered. But the promise of justice, of being able to finally find peace, promoted you forward. Each obstacle overcome, each defeated enemy, brought you closer to your ultimate goal. Revenge, not as an act of cruelty, but as an act of liberation. Your heart was beating strongly. You remembered every face, every betrayal. The general who offered you as a trophy, his cruel smile recorded in your memory. His gaze, full of greed and power, pursued you even in dreams. How could you trust him? The answer burned your throat, a bitter taste of naivety and pain. Then there were the counselors, those men with their silk clothes and their sweet words like honey poisoned. His empty promises, his hypocritical smiles, became daggers that crossed you again and again. They, who swore to protect you, gave you the enemy without hesitation. His betrayal was an open wound that did not heal. But you weren't a helpless victim. Humiliation, pain, had become fuel for your soul. Now, with each memory, the thirst for justice grew. You would not forget. You would not forgive. With each breath, you swore to avenge you of those who had stolen your dignity, your family, your future. His betrayal would be his perdition. But was forgiveness possible? You, prisoner, observed your captors. His faces, before symbols of oppression, now looked blurred, almost unreal. The time, relentless, seemed to erode the intensity of hatred. You began to understand that his cruelty was born of his own despair, from a world at war that had hardened them. Perhaps, in their hearts, there would also be room for repentance. The idea of forgiveness, previously inconceivable, began to take shape in your mind. It was not about forgetting, but to accept. Accept that the past, although painful, had contributed to forge. Accept that humiliation, loss were part of your story, but did not define it completely. Your identity, your inner strength, did not depend on the opinion of your enemies. With every dawn, bitterness faded a little more. Forgiveness, at first, was just a whisper in your heart, but became an increasingly strong echo. The path to reconciliation was long and complex, full of obstacles. But you had begun to travel it, guided by the promise of a future where the past would not define you. Forgiveness, first for them, then for yourself. You, survivor, learned to weave a new life among the ruins of your past. It was not easy, but your inner strength, forged in adversity, allowed you not only to survive, but also influence the fate of those around you. Your story, whispered from mouth to mouth, became a lighthouse of hope for other women, a testimony of resilience in a brutal world. Your influence extended beyond the personal. Your wisdom, acquired through experience, made you an influential counselor, capable of mediating disputes and offering pragmatic solutions. Despite your past, your voice was heard, your respect respected, even for those who had oppressed you one day. Your legacy became a legend, a story told and recalled through generations. You, the princess sold, became a symbol of resistance, a living test that even in the most difficult circumstances, the human spirit can prevail. Your story inspired other women to fight for their freedom and dignity, to challenge conventions and forge their own path. Your new life, woven among the debris of the empire, showed you the true face of the war. The consequences had not only marked you, but they had left a deep scar in all Byzantium. The economy, formerly flourishing, lay in ruins. The markets, once bustling, were now silent testimonies of devastation. The trade, the spine of the empire, was paralyzed, leaving the population mired in poverty and hunger. Prosody / speak. Speak, the prosody rate equals 90%. The cities, once architectural jewelry, now presented a bleak panorama. Derupted buildings, deserted streets, and a sepulchral silence had taken over what was once the throbbing heart of the empire. The infrastructure, essential for everyday life, was shattered, making it difficult to distribute food and resources. People struggled to survive, day by day. The army, weakened by war, could no longer guarantee the safety of borders. Barbarian invasions happened, taking advantage of the fragility of the empire. The defense, once impregnable, had broken, leaving the populations exposed to looting and violence. The loss of territory and resources was significant, mining even more the strength of the empire. The loss of human lives was immeasurable. Millions of people had perished in the battlefields or succumbed to diseases and hunger, leaving a demographic vacuum that deeply affected the productive capacity of the empire. The Byzantine society, shocked by war, was forced to rebuild its life from scratch, facing a gloomy reality and full of uncertainty. Your new reality, that of a princess turned into a war trophy, was intertwined with the decline of Constantinople. You felt the weight of history collapsing around you, and millenary empire agonizing. The walls, once impregnable, now seemed to whisper stories of lost battles and past glories. The imperial splendor, that brightness that had blinded so many, faded slowly, leaving behind a trace of dust and ashes. The luxury and opulence that life had defined in the Byzantine capital had vanished. The streets, formerly bustling and full of life, were now deserted, a silent reflection of the inexorable decline. The trade, the vital force of the empire, had been paralyzed, leaving behind a vacuum that felt in every corner of the city. The greatness of Constantinople was just a distant echo, a whisper in the wind. You watched how decay extended as a disease, consuming everything in its path. The influence of the empire, which once extended through vast territories, was reduced to a handful of scattered cities. Power, pride, wealth, everything dissipated as smoke. It was the end of an era. The decline of an empire that had dominated for centuries. The fall of Constantinople was an omen of a new world order, a change of time that forced you to question your own destiny. But what do historians say? Your perspective is crucial. They excavate between myths and legends, looking for the truth behind your captivity. Some suggest that your capture was a political maneuver, a pawn in a chess game between empires in decline. Others point to the simple cruelty of war, where princesses were not immune to suffering. The truth is probably at some intermediate point. It is not just a story of a princess. It is a story of power, the fall of civilizations, and the brutality of the conquest. Historical sources, often biased according to the victor's perspective, offer pieces of a complex puzzle that historians try to assemble. There are lagoons, contradictions, and much that remains in the shadow. Unraveling the truth about your destiny requires careful analysis of every detail. Each fragment of information, each reference, each interpretation must be evaluated with skepticism and academic rigor. Historians work with what they have, rebuilding a fragmented past to offer us an image, although imperfect, of what really happened. But the story that is told, the one that has survived through the centuries, is different. There is talk of an incomparable beauty princess, kidnapped by a barbarian army. A golden hair made in sapphire, symbol of imperial glory, turned into a war trophy. It is an epic story, full of drama and romanticism, but how much really in it? Legends paint it as an almost mythical figure, a heroine that resisted humiliation and suffering. Bold escape stories, secret alliances, and an impossible love that flourished in the midst of adversity are woven. But reality, as is usually the case, is more complex and less spectacular. Historians look for evidence, documents, archaeological remains that can confirm or deny these narratives. You, Theodora, become a central character in this game between history and legend. Your real story, surely, was much more prosaic, more human, less grandiloquent. Perhaps the reality of your captivity was hard, even cruel, but lacking the romanticism that legend has woven around you. The separation between fiction and truth is difficult to establish, but it is crucial to understand your destiny. Prosody / speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. But what do we really know about Theodora? The truth is that historical sources about their life are scarce and fragmentary. We do not have a detailed biography, nor a personal diary that reveals its thoughts and feelings. What we do are indirect references, short mentions in chronicles and official documents of the time, such as the annals of the barbarian kingdoms that mention it, although superficially. These chronicles, often written from the perspective of the winner, offer us only fragments of information, sometimes contradictory. Imagine, a story could highlight its beauty and nobility, while another describes it as a symbol of conquered power. The interpretation of these texts is crucial, and it depends a lot on the context in which they were written. In addition to the chronicles, there are other documents that could shed some light on the life of Theodora. They could be letters, real decrees, or even tax records that mention your name or your family. However, most of these documents have been lost over the centuries, victims of time, wars, or simple negligence. Therefore, rebuilding the history of Theodora is a detective job, a puzzle with missing pieces. You, as a spectator, have to be aware of the limitations of sources and the interpretive nature of history. It is not a perfect nor complete story, but it is what we have, which allows us to approach, even partially, to the life of this forgotten princess.
Pero la escasez de fuentes primarias no significa que no podamos reconstruir, al menos parcialmente, la historia de Theodora. Aquí es donde entran en juego las fuentes secundarias. Los historiadores modernos, analizando fragmentos de crónicas, cartas y otros documentos, han ofrecido diferentes interpretaciones de su vida. Algunos la ven como una víctima inocente, atrapada en las complejidades de la política bizantina. Otros, en cambio, la presentan como una figura más activa, capaz de manipular su destino. Estas perspectivas divergentes nos muestran cómo la historia puede ser interpretada de múltiples maneras. La falta de información directa nos obliga a trabajar con conjeturas, a llenar los vacíos con deducciones basadas en el contexto histórico y en las interpretaciones de los expertos. Es fascinante ver cómo, a partir de las mismas fuentes fragmentarias, surgen visiones tan diferentes. Algunos historiadores enfatizan su papel como pieza clave en las negociaciones políticas, considerando que su matrimonio fue un acto estratégico más que una simple transacción. Otros, en cambio, se centran en el sufrimiento personal de Theodora, destacando la opresión y la pérdida de su libertad. En definitiva, la verdad sobre Theodora probablemente se encuentra en algún punto intermedio, una mezcla compleja de circunstancias políticas y experiencias humanas. Imagina la vida de una mujer en el Imperio bizantino de aquella época. Aunque la sociedad era patriarcal, las mujeres de la élite tenían un cierto grado de influencia, especialmente en la corte imperial. Podían participar en la vida política a través de sus maridos o familiares masculinos, influyendo en las decisiones y manejando asuntos administrativos. Sin embargo, para la mayoría de las mujeres, la vida era mucho más limitada. Estaban confinadas principalmente al hogar, encargadas de la crianza de los hijos y la gestión del hogar. Su educación dependía de su posición social. Las mujeres de familias adineradas recibían instrucción en artes, música y literatura, mientras que las campesinas tenían una educación mucho más básica. El matrimonio era crucial para la mujer bizantina, determinando su estatus social y económico. Las uniones se arreglaban a menudo por conveniencia política o económica, con poca o ninguna voz para la mujer en la elección de su esposo. El divorcio era posible, pero complejo y estaba sujeto a las leyes y a la posición social de la mujer. A pesar de las restricciones, algunas mujeres lograron trascender las limitaciones de su época. A través de su inteligencia, astucia, o incluso por casualidad, algunas mujeres bizantinas encontraron maneras de influir en eventos históricos, dejando su huella en una sociedad que, en su mayoría, las mantenía al margen. Pero volvamos a Theodora. Imagina su vida, moldeada por las rígidas normas sociales del Imperio bizantino. Aunque las mujeres de la élite tenían cierto poder, su papel estaba estrictamente definido. Su destino, en gran medida, dependía de su familia y su posición social. Theodora, nacida en un entorno privilegiado, sin embargo, se movía en un mundo donde las alianzas políticas y el poder militar dictaban el rumbo de los destinos individuales. /prosody /speak. Speak prosody rate igual a 90%. Piensa en las limitaciones que enfrentaba una mujer como ella. Su educación, sus oportunidades, sus expectativas estaban limitadas por las convenciones de la época. El matrimonio, a menudo, era un acuerdo estratégico para consolidar alianzas políticas o mejorar la posición social de la familia. Para Theodora, la vida era una negociación constante dentro de un sistema patriarcal. La religión también jugó un papel fundamental en su vida. El cristianismo, con su influencia moral y social, permeaba todos los aspectos de la sociedad bizantina. Las mujeres debían adherirse a ciertas normas de comportamiento y moralidad, lo que limitaba aún más sus opciones. A pesar de todo, Theodora se las ingenió para navegar en este complejo mundo, dejando su propia marca en la historia. Piensa en otras princesas de la historia, ¿verdad? ¿Cuántas han sido piezas en juegos de poder mucho más grandes que ellas? Theodora, con su destino sellado por la guerra, recuerda a tantas otras mujeres reales que fueron utilizadas como herramientas políticas, como fichas en un tablero de ajedrez donde la vida y la muerte se decidían con frialdad. Su historia se cruza con la de tantas otras reinas y princesas que, por su linaje, se vieron obligadas a casarse con hombres que apenas conocían, formando alianzas estratégicas, con su felicidad personal como un sacrificio necesario para la estabilidad del reino. Un destino común a muchas mujeres de su época, y de otras.
Remember the princesses that were hostage, used to ensure peace or to seal treaties, their lives in the hands of unknown enemies. Theodora, in a way, was also a hostage, although her captivity took the form of imposed marriage, a destination that moved her away from her home and forced her to adapt to a new and unknown culture. Its history reminds us that, throughout history, the women of royalty did not always have control of their lives. Many times, their decisions and destiny were determined by the ambitions of the men around them. Theodora, with its silent force, reminds us of all those women who, despite the circumstances, found a way to survive and, perhaps, even to prosper. But what is Theodora today? Its history, although tragic, has not been lost in time. Imagine how his life, marked by war and oppression, inspired artists and writers over the centuries. His image, despite the shortage of real portraits, has been recreated innumerable times in paintings and sculptures, making it an enduring symbol of female force in a brutal world. Think of the historical novels that have used their history as a backdrop, or the operas that have immortalized their suffering and resistance. Even in poetry, his name has resonated as an echo of a past era, reminding us of the complexities of power and injustices suffered by women throughout history. His figure has become an archetype, a reflection of women fighting adversity. Its legacy transcends history itself, becoming a symbol for the study of women in medieval times, an analysis of how women were affected by violence and power. Theodora thus becomes a key figure to understand not only the political history of the Byzantine Empire, but also the female experience in a complex and little-studied historical period. Do you realize the magnitude of its influence? So, how do you remember Theodora today? Its history, despite the centuries, continues to resonate. You will not find great monuments dedicated to it. There are no mass celebrations. Its legacy is more subtle, quieter, but not less important. It is in history books, in academic research that seeks to dig up the truth about their life and time. It is a key piece to understand the complexity of the Byzantine Empire in its late period. Think of historical novels, in films, the plays that, inspired by their life, have brought her back to life. Although they are probably interpretations, these recreations allow us to connect with their suffering, with their strength, with their resilience. Each new interpretation, each new work, keeps it alive in our collective memory. Its history serves as a reminder of the injustices of the past. How war and power can destroy innocent lives. It is a story that challenges us, which invites us to reflect on the role of women in history, about the importance of empathy and justice. And although her name is not engraved in stone on a gigantic monument, her story lasts in the hearts and minds of those who know her. But think of Theodora, you. Imagine her life, torn from her home, of her family, turned into a symbol of defeat, an object in the hands of a conqueror. What feelings does that evoke you? Rage? Sadness? War is not just battles and strategies. It is the rupture of individual lives, the irreparable loss of innocence and dignity. Prosody. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Slavery, brutal consequence of war. erases the identity of the person reduced to merchandise. Theodora, a princess, was stripped of her title, of her right to self-determination, turned into an object of power, a trophy. Think of humiliation, constant fear, in the loss of all hope. From our perspective centuries later, we can judge the morality of those acts. We can condemn the cruelty of war and the inhumanity of slavery. But it is important to remember that these actions had real consequences in the lives of people like Theodora. Her suffering, and that of millions like her, is a constant reminder of the human cost of conflicts. Think of how fragile life can be, how easily it can be taken by war and ambition. Theodora's story reminds us that peace and justice are not a guaranteed right, but a constant objective that we must pursue. Its history is a silent cry against injustice, a call to empathy and understanding the consequences of violence. In a world where inequality and oppression continue to exist, the history of Theodora serves as a reminder of the importance of fighting for social justice. His suffering drives us to question the power structures that perpetuate injustice and challenge us to seek solutions for a more equitable future. That we cannot allow the story to be repeated. Theodora teaches us the importance of resilience, the ability to overcome adversity. Despite the brutality he suffered, his spirit did not break. Its history is a testimony of human strength, a proof that even in the most difficult circumstances, hope can last. How strong are you? Finally, the history of Theodora reminds us of the importance of remembering. We cannot allow the atrocities of the past to forget. We must learn from the mistakes of the past to build a better future. His story is not only that of a woman, but that of millions who have suffered injustice throughout history. Your suffering must be a lighthouse that guides our actions in the present. So what did you learn from Theodora? His life, torn from the innocence of the Byzantine court, threw it into a world of violence and oppression. I imagine that you were impacted to see how war not only destroys kingdoms, but that it destroys individual lives, leaving invisible scars in the soul. Theodora, a princess, became a pawn in a bigger power game than her. His trip was a constant struggle for survival, a resilience test in the face of adversity. Think of the courage that he had to have to face such a cruel destiny, uncertainty and constant fear. Can you imagine the inner strength necessary to maintain hope amid despair? In spite of everything, Theodora leaves us a legacy. Its history reminds us of the fragility of life and the importance of peace. It teaches us that even in the most difficult circumstances, hope can persist. His life, although tragic, becomes a symbol of resistance and perseverance. I know you wonder, was it common to sell princesses as war trophies? The truth is that, although it was not usual, it did happen, especially in times of political instability. Theodora was not an isolated case, although its history is particularly tragic for its youth and the cruelty of the destiny that it had to live. Think about the symbolic power of such act. To submit the princess, symbol of enemy royalty, meant humiliate the entire kingdom. And what happened to your family? History does not provide precise details about the immediate destiny of their relatives. The war was chaos, and many families separated or suffered terrible losses. Imagining the anguish of her family without knowing about her is heartbreaking. The lack of information reinforces the idea of the fragility of life at that time. Finally, you will wonder about historical accuracy. As in any historical story based on limited sources, there is some speculation. The sources we have about Theodora are fragmentary, but enough to rebuild a plausible image of his life, although full of holes that our imagination must fill cautiously. Remember that it is a reconstruction, not an absolute truth. To deepen the life of Theodora and better understand the historical context, I recommend the book Theodora, Empress of Byzantium by John Julius Norwich. It is a fascinating biography that will immerse you in the political intrigue and the daily life of the Byzantine court. Norwich masterfully describes the time, and although it does not focus exclusively on the aspect of Theodora as a war trophy, it will help you understand the complexities of the Byzantine Empire at that time. /prosody /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Another excellent resource is the documentary, The Fall of the Roman Empire. Although it does not focus specifically on Theodora, it offers an overview of the historical period in which he lived, showing wars, conquests, and political tensions that made their situation possible. You will see how political instability and wars influence people's destiny, even princesses. If you prefer a more academic approach, you can explore articles and studies specialized in Byzantine history. Search in academic databases such as JSTOR or Project Muse. using terms such as Byzantine princess, war trophies, or polyetical marriages. You will find detailed analysis that will provide you with a deeper understanding of the topic. Remember that history is a puzzle, and each source brings a piece. Combining the information of different books and documentaries, together with academic research, you can build a more complete and nuanced image of Theodora's life and the context in which it was wrapped. Cheer up to explore. And now, something very important. This video would not have been possible without the help of a lot of people. I want to especially thank Anna for her tireless research work, reviewing each data with an admirable rigor. His dedication has been fundamental to ensure the historical accuracy of Theodora's story. Thanks to your critical eye, we have been able to polish every detail, avoiding inaccuracies that could have distorted the story. I also want to thank Miguel for his incredible talent in video edition. Transforming my ideas into such shocking images has been a fascinating process, and their patience and creativity have been key to achieving the result you see. Its ability to create visually captivating atmospheres has raised this project to another level. Thank you, Miguel, for your mastery. And of course, thanks to you for taking the time to watch this video. Your support is what motivates me to continue creating content and sharing these fascinating stories. I hope you enjoyed the trip through the life of Theodora as much as I enjoyed creating it. Without your interest, this project would not make sense. And speaking of thanks, you have also been fundamental in this project. Thank you for spending your time to watch this video about Theodora. If you liked it, remember to subscribe to not miss the next chapters of this exciting story. In addition, you can share it with your friends so that they also know the fate of this Byzantine princess. To keep up with my projects, you can follow me on my social networks. Find the links to my Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook in the video description. There I share additional content, images, and advances of future videos. Do not hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or suggestion. In the description you will also find additional information about the sources that I have used for this video, including links to books, academic articles, and web pages. Remember that Theodora's story is complex and fascinating, and this is just an interpretation based on available historical evidence. I hope you have been interesting. And finally, thanks again for your support. Without you, this project would not be possible. Remember that your opinion is very important to me. Until the next video, I hope you enjoyed Theodora's story. If you liked it, give like and subscribe for more fascinating stories. What do you think about your destiny? Leave it in the comments. /prosody is /speak.